degrees, the air is about 32 degrees. One night, his boat was bombed, and the bomb went off about a foot away from the boat, and it was the only injury he had, and he got a Purple Heart from it. And it was the only injury he had during World War II, and he got a piece of shrapnel in his back, which was a piece of the metal bomb that explodes, and it's red hot piece of jagged steel from the bomb, and it embedded in his back. And he always had arthritis for his entire life, and it was, from that. At 18 or whatever he was at the time. That was that. After Bougainville, the troops headed back to their base at Guadalcanal, and then he was aboard his ship for another month. They were on standby to do a landing at an island called Saipan, but that battle, the army was in Saipan, I believe, before they were, and they were successful and didn't need to do the mop-up. The water was too shallow for them to come to shore, so they had to walk through the water over coral to get to the land. Japanese were shooting everywhere. About 3 of every 25 Americans lived. He was very fortunate to have been one of the few who did live through that landing. After that, it was Iwo Jima, which was probably the single most fatal battle this country's ever waged, because, and I'm throwing out the history here, but I think, after reading Flags of Our Fathers, which was about Iwo Jima, I believe this is true. 1 of every 2 American troops that went to Iwo Jima was killed. So 50% of every American soldier we sent to Iwo Jima didn't walk off that island alive. And it was a tiny little dormant volcano. No vegetation, anything on it. It was just one big piece of rock, but it was a very strategic landing strip for the Japanese Air Force. And that's, where they launched all their planes, which were called Zeros. And the Japanese army had caves built all through that piece of rock. So these guys would go in and not see anybody, once again, untraditional battle, and they'd be fired at from everywhere underground. And it was ruthless. It was, they'd cut, after they'd kill American soldiers, they'd cut off limbs. I mean, it was just absolutely horrific. And a lot of people think that the famous flag raising on Mount Suribachi on the top of Iwo Jima was done after we captured the island, but it was done right after the landing. And it was a huge flag, and the commanding officer of the Marine Corps wanted a big flag up there because, and I'll quote, and I'll use some bad language, but I remember the quote. He said, "I want every one of those Japanese son of a bitches to see that flag up there on the top of Mount Suribachi to know we're here." And it was actually a pretty brief battle. I think it lasted 45 days or 2 months, somewhere around there. Thousands of casualties from both sides, but it was a big reason we won the war. So after after Iwo Jima, he was sent back to Guam to finish that battle. That was another mop-up duty. He was very happy after Guam because he got a furlough, which is a rest period soldiers get after combat, and get a little time off. First place he was sent was back to San Diego, California, then back in his home in Lake Forest, which is, his house, where his house is, right over by the high school, where he went to school. After that, he was sent to Norfolk, Virginia for the last 15 days of his furlough which was preparing him to send him back out there. And at that time, his girlfriend, which was my mom and your grandma, and sister-in-law, future sister-in-law, which was my mom's sister, my Aunt Nita, you know very well, they went to visit him there. The day before he was planning on leaving, he got the war was going to be over. So he sent back to Lake Forest, Illinois, and with his papers. And on VJ Day was the official day the war ended. He was he ended up at a place called McCormick's in Lake Bluff here, which just closed 5 years ago. And he celebrated with his best friend, a guy named Spot Dunn, who has a ton of relatives still in the area. And that was it.
I think we have time for one last question, and that is, has the war, as being the son of a father who was a war veteran, were there any actions that showed that the war did affect him?
Oh yeah, that's a great question, and once again, it wasn't anything my dad told me, but my mom grew up in Libertyville, Illinois, and my Uncle Frank was younger than my mom, and he was a guy I went and visited in California when I was about 18 years old, and he told all these great stories about my dad growing up. My Uncle Frank was a little bit of a rabble-rouser himself, and my dad, when he got home from the war, he'd go over to my grandma's house in Libertyville, my grandma, his mother-in-law's house in Libertyville, and he used to help her with things. And one time he was up painting her house, and he was up on the ladder, and he got up on the roof, and my Uncle Frank and his little smart-aleck friend stole his ladder. And Frank said he jumped off that ladder and kicked both their tails, even though he was only 5'5", but he said then he knew, he learned how to be tough when he was over there. And then he also told me there were a couple times, when he got home, even a couple of years after, my mom would wake up and my dad wouldn't be in bed next to her, and she'd go outside and she'd find him in the front yard in his pajamas, sound asleep, standing there pointing a rifle. And she'd wake him up, and all of a sudden he'd be, oh, I was asleep, and he'd be fine and go back in the house. A couple of times she woke up, he had his hands around her neck, choking. And she'd wake him up, Bob, oh, I'm fine, don't worry about it, no problem. So that affected him. The other thing that I'll tell you is I had a cousin, my dad's sister's son, Ronnie, my cousin Ronnie, was a great kid. He enlisted in Vietnam in 1967. He went over there. He thought he wanted to serve his country, just like his dad had done, just like his uncle had done. And he went over there with a purpose, and he earned a Bronze Star, a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart when he was over there. And he was furloughed, sent home for a little rest after battle, and his personal carrier hit a minefield and killed everybody aboard as he was going back. He was 18 years old in 1968, was killed in Vietnam. And my grandma, my dad's mom, had sent a son over there, into war, and, was always worried, and he came back, and then sent a grandson over there, and he didn't come back. He came back, in a box, and my grandma died 6 months after my cousin Ronnie died. So there were more casualties of that war, of war in our family, and just my cousin dying. So anyway.
I would like to thank my dad for taking the time out of his day to fill me in with a lot of interesting stories about my grandpa's time at war, and I would also like to thank my grandpa. I would sure he would be looking down at me right now, proud of me, knowing that I would like to take the time out of my day to learn more about what he did, and I would like to thank him. So thank you.